I think for those of us who subscribe to nonviolence, we need to be looking at social media and asking, "Hey, did I wake up this morning and choose violence on social media
Wow.
to hurt the soul of a fellow image bearer? And
Hmm.
why am I doing that? Do I need to take a step back?"
I'm so happy to be here today with Joash-Thomas from up in Canada. Hi, Joash. How's it going?
It's going well. Thanks for having me, Drew.
Yeah, Joash, you're the director of International Justice Mission Canada, right?
Yeah, so one of the national directors. I serve as our national director of mobilization and advocacy. So basically, activating the Canadian Church as well as the Canadian government to protect people who are poor from violence around the world with IJM.
Yeah, such fascinating work. And people can check out an interview we did with you a few months ago about justice and biblical justice, I think is what we were talking about.
That's right.
Today we're talking about something very different. We're talking about social media, right?
Yes, yes, exciting topic.
Yeah, well, everybody's on social media, whether we like it or not. And I think a lot of people have different attitudes about it. But we're coming to this, and I asked you to come on because you're doing a seminar, right? A webinar with some folks on this very issue. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is being hosted by the Center for Public Speaking, which is led by my dear friend Daniel Gilman, and it's with myself and a couple of other friends like Beth Moore, may or may not have heard of her. um, Also, Dr. Karen Swallow Pryor, and really, I think. I'm just honored to, get to share the virtual stage with these two incredible ladies. But, that the reality is that so many of us look up to Beth and Karen Swallow Pryor for their social media etiquette and their social media grace. And, it's easy for someone like me with, a lot less thousand followers than them to be graceful on social media. But, as I've gained more followers and friends in social media, I've realized that the bigger your social media platforms tend to get, the bigger the vitriol you tend to attract, especially as women and people of color, and especially women. And I was recently tagged in something with them promoting the event and saw a lot of hate and vitriol that they had to put up with. So. I think it takes a lot more courage and grace to withstand that kind of, attention and hatred coming your way when you're, a well-known public figure. And we all have something to learn from them. So I'm excited to learn as much as participate in this, even though I'm one of the virtual speakers.
Yeah, it's going to be a really interesting time. I'm excited. And we'll include all those details for registration and the date. That's going to be next week, April.
Yeah. It's going to be April 19th.
April 19th.
Tuesday.
Yep. So,
and it's going to be at 12 p.m. Eastern. And you can find the details on the Center for Public Speaking's website or my social media at joash-thomas or, Beth Moore or Karen Swallow Pryor's social media as well. And and of course we can, include the details in the show notes too.
Yeah. So let's get into it. And I feel like there's a lot. I want to spend a good bit of time talking about how we use it positively, but it almost seems like we need a sort of apology for why Christians even should be on social media. My experience with social media has been, at times it's been fun, at times it's been distracting, and the thing it really hasn't been primarily is life-changing. And as Christians, we're supposed to be in the business of, helping ourselves grow and be like Jesus and bring life to the world. So tell me about your experience with social media and why you think it's an important topic anyhow.
Yeah. So, I think my experience with social media actually first really started when I was working in the political world. So when I worked in the political world, I did political communications. And, as you're trying to get the message out for your clients in the political world, clients that you believe in. You want their message to get out there so you get more voters on election day, so you get more support for policies, good policies that they're pushing for. As you figure out ways to go back to the drawing board and get your message out there, you realize that using social media really is a no-brainer if that's the end goal, right? And so I really started doing social media professionally first, before even finding my own voice and sharing my own thoughts on my social media platforms. But it's without a doubt a very powerful tool that people outside the church see as important. And so coming into the ministry world, then I got to see social media being both used for good and also abused at the same time. And I certainly think you see both types of social media usage, even among Christian leaders today. Unfortunately, you've got leaders like Beth and Karen that use it really well, and then you've got others, a lot of male leaders in specific, who, for whatever reason, it's just another outlet for their spiritual abuse patterns. Unfortunately, and so I'm with you. I think just like anything that's out there, man-made creation, godly creation, but common grace, right? Just like anything out there in all of creation, I feel like social media can be a good thing when we know how to engage with it well and use it well. And I've certainly seen that in my experience. I've built a lot of friendships on social media. I feel like social media was in a lot of ways really a community for me when we didn't have a church community, and when we lost church friends from 2016 on due to toxicity in the church around politics, I found a lot of like-minded folks on social media. And again, there can be the negative of the echo chamber, so you don't want to get sucked in too much into that. But yeah, I think it can be a good thing just as much as it can be a bad thing.
So I had a similar experience with during COVID and lockdowns, where we didn't have community in person very much. And at the same time, without going too far into my own story, at the same time that we were wrestling with lockdown and COVID and isolation, our church was going through some really serious things, which kind of made the isolation and the feeling of being alone that much more acute. And I really valued social media. It really gave me people to talk to. I went from, long Facebook conversations to doing Zoom calls with some people and on and on. This podcast actually kind of came out of social media. So I felt like there was some good to it. But at the same time, and you mentioned this too, when church was getting toxic, when you were struggling with relationships, when things were difficult, IRL, you go to social media, and there's something that makes me cringe there, because it's like we can kind of pull away and pick our own community that's safe, that feels okay to us. Do you feel like that social media is a challenge to the in real life church? And if so, how do we balance that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, just the way I found like-minded folks, justice-minded folks, I would say in my case, on social media. I feel like I was also going to church with people who were being radicalized by, ultra-conservative figures on social media at the same time. And so there was definitely that tension to manage where, I'd have a great conversation with them about racial justice, and we'd come back 2 weeks later and I'd find out that they were a lot more radicalized than our last conversation because of their social media echo chambers, because of, certain figures that they have no relationship with, that they follow on social media, who, encourage them to think one way and they kind of buy into that. Right. And so that's absolutely going to be the case, which is why ultimately as a Christian, I think I need to come back to the center of it all, right? Which is Jesus. He is the glue that holds the church together. So, I think the moment that we forget that nothing else matters, like none of our other tribes on earth or allegiances on earth matter as much as, being bought and united together by the blood of Christ. When we forget that reality, we tend to place our identities and social media and other things higher than what we're first supposed to place our identity to. So even though I'd found a community of justice-minded folks, at the end of the day, I feel like I was still okay with going to church with these folks who had landed in completely different places because, I felt like there was grace in the midst of it, the grace of Jesus that still united us at the end of the day. And they didn't necessarily see it in that way because for them, not thinking like me on politics means that you're not thinking like Orthodox Christians should. And that became a form of gracelessness and self-righteousness that I saw with them. So all to say, I've definitely seen both sides of it, and there's definitely a tension to manage there, but I think that's okay. I think ultimately, as long as we remember who we are and whose we are as Christians, nothing else should really come in the way, including our social media habits and practices.
Is it fair to say that we should prioritize the in real life church relationships we have over social media?
100%, I'd say so. I think social media is important and can be a great place to engage in, especially in the public square, especially with advocacy for people who are poor and oppressed, right? So because I get to lead our advocacy work, I've helped run many social media campaigns that have in the past moved the U.S. government and and now we're hoping to move the Canadian government through social media because our elected leaders are in social media. A lot of thought leaders are in social media and they're monitoring the chatter there. So, as Christians, like it can be a really powerful arena in the public square for us to do advocacy on behalf of people who are poor and oppressed. And, withdrawing from social media could mean withdrawing from those opportunities. So that's something to keep in mind. But I think there's definitely a value to in-person, real-life stuff as much as it's applicable and wise under the law, especially during these times, obviously, while respecting the authority of the state and the guidelines of the state when it comes to public health to look out for our neighbors. I think it is absolutely important to prioritize the in real life stuff. So, for example, my wife and I found a new church community after moving up here, and as incredible and as awesome as it was to find that online community of folks when we didn't have a church, it's been a breath of fresh air at another level, really a whole other level to have people in your life, people who you're sick with COVID. When you're sick with COVID, people who just send you food and, buy you gift cards for your favorite delivery services and, are just present and aware in your life and people that you can share details with in person that you wouldn't feel comfortable doing that in an online public setting. So yeah, absolutely with you on the need to not abandon the in real life stuff at the same time.
Yeah. And with that, along with the in real life care that we get and just the fellowship that you can have, in flesh and blood, there's also the need to be exposed to voices that voices that aren't disembodied, if I can use a double negative there, and voices that I'm not necessarily choosing and curating and having algorithms curate for me. Obviously, and you mentioned it at the top here, seeing some really negative comments on social media, that's different from somebody that you're doing life with, somebody that's buying you, bring over supper, and then hearing something that you disagree with. You don't get that sort of serendipity, the painful serendipity in real life that you get in or that you don't get that painful serendipity on social media that you're kind of forced with when you're committed to a community of believers in real life. You mentioned how powerful advocacy is on social media, and I actually worked for a couple of years in social media management for a global health firm, a global health communications firm, and as much as I enjoyed the work, and I think there was some good stuff, the actual public-facing social media stuff didn't feel to make that much of a difference. It was just creating noise. And I think that this was several years back now. Things have probably gotten better. But can you speak just to the sense that some of us get of kind of a slacktivism where I can click like on a post, I can share an Instagram, and it doesn't really change anything? Can you either agree with that or push back?
Yeah. I think I can do both. So I can definitely agree with it in the sense of just online activism is never going to be enough, right? And ask anyone who works in advocacy. They'll tell you that the online advocacy must turn into in-person advocacy at some point. So, for example, when organizations have supporters participate in an online social media campaign to move elected officials, they don't just stop there. Any good grassroots organizer will go the next step and also set up an in-person meeting. But what the online noise does is it helps give you some credibility in the room during that in-person meeting. So, I remember meeting with members of Congress back when I was on our U.S. team with IJM, and we'd walk into the room with them and they'd say, "Oh yeah, my team has been monitoring chatter on social media about this. People seem to really care about this, and we're noticing that a lot of people in our district and in our state care about this just based off of bios of who's tweeting at us and that kind of thing about these issues." So yeah, thanks for actually having a conversation with us about this. We've been curious, but we've never had a way to ask for more information because these have just been online interactions. So thanks for this in-person meeting. And they'd really appreciate us doing that and connecting with them in real life. So there's definitely a value to that. But you're absolutely right. At the same time, I think a lot of us, especially in the younger generation, settle for slacktivism. And this is something that I have tried to push the church away from as well, without naming any names. I've seen really well-intentioned online activism groups within the church on specific human rights issues. They started off well, and the moment you ask them to do something a little more, they'd feel the pinch of that and feel the discomfort that came with, and would shy away from that. When, for us as Christians, for me as a Christian, at the end of the day, I'm also mindful of the fact that seeking justice will always cost you something, right? So we have made seeking justice like an easy, trendy kind of thing to do on social media. But if you look at church history, if you look at the Old Testament prophets, Jesus, the 12 disciples, the early church, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King Jr., his successors today who are advocating for the dignity of Black and Indigenous lives, seeking justice has always cost us something and will always cost us something if we're doing it Jesus's way. Unfortunately, online slacktivism gives us the benefit of feeling like we're seeking justice when it's convenient for us on our terms. But it may not do much to move the needle long term because it's not really costing us something the way that Jesus would have us do it.
Yeah, that's such a good rule of thumb. If it doesn't actually cost me something, it's probably not making an impact.
Yeah, that's a good filter. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's move the conversation to think about dialogue in conversation. Now, obviously, these overlap between advocacy, people coming on and having something they want to speak to, something they want to give voice to. A lot of my interaction on social media has been, frankly, hammering out theological questions and church issues, and talking with people, sharing both positive things and hope, and then working through trauma, even on social media. And I know that may sound kind of funny to some people, but it's real. And yet it's so easy for that to become toxic. And your co-hosts or co-speakers, Beth Moore or Karen Swallow Pryor, definitely get some of that. It's so easy to get sucked in by the trolls, and it's so easy to feel like you're having some sort of meaningful debate. But when you step away, at least to me, sometimes it feels like noise. And I don't always know how to make that distinction between this is a healthy conversation. Maybe it's hard, maybe it's intense, but this is actually going somewhere, versus, I'm just feeding the trolls, or horrors, maybe I'm the troll myself. Can you give some thoughts to how to engage, how to dialogue on social media, or is it just impossible?
Yeah, I love what you just said. Sometimes there can be a very thin line between, being oppressed and being an oppressor, as my therapist likes to say, where you can go from being trolled to now being the troll.
Yeah.
And it's a very thin line that we can lose sight of if we're not approaching social media wisely. I think something that's been helpful for me is having a group of friends in real life who hold me accountable, whether it's my wife, or quite honestly, Daniel Gilman's one of those friends where, sometimes he'll shoot me a text saying, "Hey man, I noticed your tweet. Is everything okay? Like, are you doing all right?" Like, maybe I'm reading too much into it, but, I sense some cynicism in there that's, not necessarily healthy, because it's the opposite of hope. Like, you sound a little different on social media today. I remember, when I was down with COVID a few days ago, my wife just came up to me and she said, "Yeah, you probably shouldn't tweet when you're this sick."
Nice.
I see your replies, and I think you can be a little more graceful. Like, it's not like horrible, but it's not quite you either. Wow. At the same time, So I feel like it's definitely helpful to have friends and family and fellow church members and even church leaders, if you trust them, to let them into your life in that capacity and have them hold you accountable and give them that permission to check in with you if you seem off on social media. So I think, bringing in the real life, as you gently prodded us to even in the beginning of this conversation, I think that can be something helpful to then center and guide our virtual disembodied conversations.
Yeah. And
because, go ahead.
Well, with that, there is a tendency, and I've seen it in myself, where I'm engaging in discussion online, on Twitter, on Facebook, that I don't actually really want the people around me to necessarily see. Not that I'm hiding it, but also, just like, well, this is the online world, you wouldn't get it, That's a real red flag, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%. And that's exactly what I was going to say, which is, you need embodied people in real life to remind you that the souls you're engaging with online aren't disembodied souls. They're real people with families, with parents, siblings, children. And, our words have the power to hurt people, right? Scripture is pretty clear about this. Like, our words can start a fire. Wars have been started with just a few words. So I think it's helpful to have that embodied community around you that holds you accountable, that keeps you centered. Because otherwise, as my pastor says, you're essentially your own benchmark of spiritual maturity if you're doing life by yourself, right?
Exactly.
And you might be the most spiritual mature person you're aware of when you're in isolation and outside community. And that's just one of the reasons why we need that real life community. And a lot of times your virtual community can turn into your real life community. I think that's happened in a few instances with me, and that's been a blessing. So I'm grateful for those relationships too. But yeah, you definitely need that healthy balance of being grounded in real life.
Mm-hmm. What about the tendency, and again, I'm speaking for myself, but also observing others, the tendency, and I'm not a programmer, but it also feels like the tendency of the algorithms behind social media to really emphasize, highlight, raise visibility when there's a disagreement on something. Like we might see a picture of a cute puppy and click like, but we're not going to engage in a fight. And this feels like it has the tendency then to heighten the importance of our disagreements, say women's roles in the church, or which terminology you use around something like social justice, or what's critical race theory. And when a lot of people, good faith brothers and sisters in Christ, may find a lot of agreement, what we tend to focus on social media is the disagreement. And I'm not saying that that's all bad, because we need space to hammer out those disagreements. But is there some way to kind of step beyond this is a huge point of argument, this is a huge difference, and actually see the big picture of the unity we have?
Yeah.
I mean, it seems like, if I can just rant for a minute more, it seems like social media should be good at that, right? Like, we get the big picture of the church on social media. You can see people all around the world loving Jesus, and yet we spend most of our time, or I've spent most of my time, narrowing in on the nitpicky things.
Yeah. No, that's an important point. And I think as much as we want to focus on the positive and talk about good, the reality is that our human hearts are deceptive above all things, as Scripture says. And, at the end of the day, our natural innate tendency is always going to be depraved and always going to be fallen in that way, to seek things that further toxicity instead of tov, or the goodness of God. So yeah, you're absolutely right about that danger as well. And it's certainly a tension that I wrestle with too. I think something that has been helpful for me is just trying to be more proactive than reactive on social media. So if you wanted something to react to on social media, you can just hop on Twitter every single day and find something that you disagree with, or that, better yet, 100 other people are disagreeing with on that particular day, and hop on that, bash that poor person or theologian that had a slip up or a mistake, or genuinely said something stupid that you disagree with, and just kind of pile on with that mob mentality, or you can take a step back and try to be proactive in what you're putting out there, right? So I try, don't always succeed at this, but I try my best not to quote tweet someone I disagree with just to bash them on social media, right? Or to share a post just to disagree with them. If I'm going to disagree with someone, I'd rather take a step back, think something out from a proactive lens, and then put that content out there to say, hey, so instead of saying this person said this and I disagree with them, just saying, here's what I believe and here's why I believe this.
But Joash, it's so much more fun to show how stupid everybody else is.
Yeah, totally is. Especially when people push your buttons or people respond to you. That's when it gets tricky for me. When I don't go seeking war and someone random drops in my comments and tries to incite a war.
You seriously don't quote tweet people that are like to say, oh, this person I really disagree with.
I try not to. I think I broke that rule once in this past month, if I'm not mistaken. But I think over the past 6 months, if you were to scroll through my Twitter feed, you'd find a really hard time finding me quote tweeting someone that I disagree with over the past 6 months, because I've genuinely tried to say, well, there's a better way to disagree with people than to shame them, to call them out. And in some cases, you do have to call out abusive institutions. But even in doing so, I can do that with the grace of Jesus. I can do that in a way that's still loving towards them, that doesn't blow up their notifications, that doesn't send haters and hatred and trolls their way. So again, a very thin line in how to do this, and again, the cynic in you can say, well, isn't that different from, or like how is that different from subtweeting people then? Because subtweeting isn't necessarily healthy either. So again, taking a step back, I think it's just helpful to be putting proactive content out there, to start conversations and start good conversations instead of latching onto a toxic reactive conversation, even if it's something that you agree on, and that's justice minded and that Jesus would agree with, because the ends never justify the means, right? As Christians, and we always want to hold true to the fact that the way we do things matter just as much as what we're doing. How we say certain things matter just as much as what we're saying, because that communicates volumes about what we're actually saying in our message, and our witness and credibility are on the line as well.
Yeah. So along with that really very practical line you've drawn for yourself about not quote tweeting or not quoting somebody on social media just to highlight that you disagree with them, you're kind of alluding to James's rule of being swift to listen, slow to speak, slow to anger. Are there any other practical things that we should be thinking about to apply that in social media?
Yeah.
Because that's such a high bar. Like, I almost feel like James was writing that for our generation, for the social media generation. It almost feels like the opposite. Swift to listen, slow to speak, slow to anger. Almost feels like the opposite of what social media is geared toward. So how do we make that practical? You've given some. Do you have any other thoughts?
Yeah. So I think something else that can be helpful, I feel like this could help in combating the spread of disinformation as well. Because if you really look at disinformation and its spread in social media, what really is disinformation? Disinformation is really a bad piece of information that someone's sharing online out of instinct or out of confirmation bias without even taking a step back to ask the question, is this true? By putting this out there, am I actually hurting people more than helping people? And does that line up with my calling as a disciple of Jesus Christ, as a Christian, right? So I feel like well-intentioned people can sometimes feed disinformation by sharing information that aligns with your most cherished, beautiful values, but that may not be 100% true, but it helps you in the moment in scoring a point against the other side. It helps you in the moment to own the cons or own the libs or, whatever have you. And I don't really think that's helpful and Christ-like either, right? So I feel like anytime I see some new piece of information on social media that triggers me, that irks me, that angers me, or helps me prove a point, I'm always taking a step back to actually go verify that through an internet search to see if news sources have actually confirmed this, if this is historically accurate, before sharing that, because lying to score political points isn't the way of Jesus either, right? Lying to seek justice isn't really the way of Jesus either, because as Stanley Hauerwas so beautifully says, truth requires no violence. So if I'm, I think for those of us who subscribe to nonviolence, we need to be looking at social media and asking, hey, did I wake up this morning and choose violence on social media to hurt the soul of a fellow image bearer? And why am I doing that? Do I need to take a step back? Who do I need to surround myself with so that I'm not seeking violence in this virtual way?
Yeah, that's good. That's really good. Yeah, so many times I've seen posts, and I've had moments of guilt here too. But somebody's like, I'm not sure if this is true, but I just had to share it. And I'm like, if you're not sure it's true, then don't share it.
Yeah.
So you're saying that actually, if something really feels like it fits in with your priors, if it really is like, I knew it, that actually should also be a red flag.
100%. Because, the algorithms probably want you to see that and share that and all that, right? But what does the Holy Spirit want you to do in that moment?
Yeah. One last angle to take. Social media is largely about visibility. And you started talking about how when we are on social media, we have the chance to get the ears of important people. But as Christians, we're called to humility, to moderation. And so this concept of building a platform, and this is something we've talked about on That Jesus podcast, like building a podcast platform, building an audience, sometimes that feels like it's kind of the opposite of what we're supposed to be doing, putting yourself out there versus taking the servant position. How do we exercise humility while growing our followers?
Man, that's such a great question. Not sure if I feel confident to answer that, in a way that I feel like I've mastered. But, I feel like that's a question that we should keep wrestling with until the day we die, because that is the way of Jesus, right? I think the moment we stop asking ourselves that question is when we start to get into trouble for not being humble Jesus's way. So, and the struggle is real, right? So I'm looking into, this might be the first time I've shared this in public, but I'm looking into writing a book somewhere in the near future, and I'm in conversations with a few publishers, and one of the reasons why publishers are drawn towards me is because of my social media following, and
Sure.
I've actually tried to set people up with my contacts in the publishing industry, people who I think should be writing books, and the number one thing that they've been told is, hey, if you don't have X number of followers, we're not even interested in having a conversation with you, because we only want marketable publishers. We only want publishers that have their inbuilt audience, which might seem like a lazy way to do publishing, but that's the real world that we live in, right? And a lot of Christian publishers prefer that as well, because that's the industry, that's the market. So that is the reality. Like if you have something good to say, and if you want people to hear it, you, to a certain degree, have to play that game in a wise way, right? But I think our goal should never be building a platform for the sake of building a platform, or selling a book for the sake of selling a book, or putting ideas out there for the sake of putting ideas out there. I think as Christians, our priority should always be being faithful, right? Like, what has God called me to at the end of the day? What's the lane that he's called me to run in? And if it involves this, then how do I do this in the most Christ-honoring way possible without selling my soul? Because, I mentioned earlier that I worked in politics. I did sell a lot of my soul to work in the political world, and learned a lot of mistakes from that. I don't want to go back. I don't want to do that again, because that's something that the Lord rescued me from. So how do I avoid that in everything else that I do, whether it's being on the speaking circuit, being in the writing circuit, in the publishing circuit, soon, hopefully, how do I be faithful. And then at the end of the day, something else I'll share is that we're all called to different things. Yes, we're called to the same end goal, the Great Commandment, the Great Commission, but we're called to get there in different ways. So some of us are called to host podcasts. Some of us are called to, faithfully shepherd your local church and be completely unknown. Some of us are called to sell all our possessions and give to advance the kingdom. Some are called to do human rights work. Some are called to, do evangelism, discipleship. Like, we're all called to like these different lanes that we're called to run in, right? So how do we be faithful to what God has called us to, and what does humility look like in doing that? So again, it may seem like I'm dodging a question by not giving a very specific, tangible answer here, but I think each of us need to do the hard work of discerning that with the Holy Spirit. And when we do that, we can then come up with guidelines around, should I do this? Should I not do this? What opportunities do I say yes to? What opportunities do I run away from? And what are the lines that the Holy Spirit, knowing me, has encouraged me to draw around these opportunities so that I can be faithful while honoring Christ at the same time?
Yeah, that's really well said. And I guess one thing that, listening to you, knowing that you have a growing social media presence, and we look at someone like Beth Moore, and are like, wow, so much impact. But with respect to that, another way to help us not get puffed up by our followers, puffed up, is to recognize how fleeting that quote unquote influence is. We started off by talking about the power of social media to make a difference, and we shouldn't shun it. And yet, while on the one hand there is a lot of power, it's an amazing tool, it's also not that much in the big scheme of things. It's important, but in context, having 10,000 followers on social media pales so much in comparison to being part of a church with 20, 50, 100 faithful lovers of Jesus that are walking in mutual discipleship. And again, those who compare themselves among themselves are not wise, right? But I think in social media world, it just helps to keep in context. These are real people, and they're also not real people. They're real people to the extent that clicking that follow button, that's how much energy it took.
Yeah. It's always going to be important for us to keep that principle in mind, and know that the real in-person work of relationship building, of loving people, will always be more difficult than just clicking a button to like or follow or retweet. I think it's important for us to just be mindful of that, and again, ask that question of, how am I being faithful in what God has called me to, and how do I faithfully love this embodied soul well, even though they may seem disembodied on social media? How do I do that well through the channel of social media? And and I think the thing that I really appreciate and admire about Beth Moore and Karen Swallow Pryor is they tweet a lot in reflection of their big platforms, and how much it's influenced them, and how much they're still struggling with it. They're pretty candid in that reflection, which I think helps others like myself and us to also be mindful of that kind of realness and struggle coming with social media. And then one other thing I'll say is, I've had conversations with my therapist recently as my social media platforms have, started to grow, and because I want my therapist to hold me accountable in not changing and not becoming a different person. And the one question that he asks me often is, hey, who's really wagging who at the end of the day when it comes to your followers, your social media, people who follow you? like, are you following them or are they following you? Are you putting stuff out that they latch onto, or are you putting stuff out that you feel called to, and stuff that's actually going to help improve people's lives? Because if we're not careful, we can very easily feed into, and I love people I engage with who follow me on social media. They're all great people, but let's be real, outrage sells. And without a doubt, the most traction I've had on some of my most viral tweets have been on tweets that feed that outrage, right? For whatever reason, even if I didn't mean it in that way, people can take it to mean it in that way. So so how do I be mindful of what I'm putting out there, and how do I draw a line in putting out stuff that I feel called to put out, even if one person likes it and no one retweets it? Am I okay with that for the sake of being faithful, or do I have to put out that content that feeds the outrage just to build that platform? So that's something I wrestle with on a daily basis in therapy.
Yeah. Yeah, well, thanks so much for your honesty there. I think that's a great place to end. And we will post the details for your seminar next week with this podcast. Thanks for your time, Joash.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me, and thanks for all the great work you do.
Yeah, appreciate it. And you can follow Joash-Thomas at joash-thomas on Twitter, where you are being slow to speak with 12,600 tweets.
Those are the undeleted ones. Yeah.
Okay. All the best.